I've had a lot of interesting conversations with young people of late, and quite a few of them are of the opinion that they want to set out on their own, create content. Sometimes they do this alongside what they're doing in their daily lives, in that they are doing a 9 to 5 or a 9 to 6, as the case may be, but they are creating content on the side with the hope that at some point they'll be able to do it full time. I thought it might be a good idea to speak to somebody who's made it. Sarthak Ahuja, investment banker and educator, is joining me, and he does a lot of content. He's a successful content creator, educator as well. Sarthak, thanks so much for taking the time, and I think some of the advice that you'll be able to dispense through this platform will benefit, I think, a lot of people. So first, it is a business like some other businesses, and so that from that perspective, the first question is, what kind of capital do you need to set aside, and how do you get started?
Well, Alex, thank you for having me. I think the capital requirement is barely anything. And I would say for anyone to get started, all that you really need is your mobile phone with a decent camera, and you don't even require a microphone. I mean, for the longest time, for all the short form videos that I put out, I walk around with my equipment with me. So I think you don't really need it. And as you kind of grow over a period of time, you automatically learn how you can enhance the experience for your audience. And then, of course, a little bit of investment in maybe better lighting, better microphones could help. But the barrier to entry in this industry is extremely low, and anyone could get started.
Or is it targeted content and finding your niche? What according to you is the secret sauce?
I mean, I would look at it as any other consumer business. If you think about it, the barrier to entry to start a business in D2C today is so low because you could go on a ship rocket, tie up with them, or a delivery to take care of your logistics. You could set up a website or an e-commerce store on a Shopify or a WooCommerce, and collect payments through Razorpay or some other payment gateway. So the thing is, the infrastructure exists. But still, does that mean you will be able to build the right kind of consumer brand? Possibly not, because you will have to figure out at least two edges or two places where you can differentiate from the competition. And I would say, rather than building your content around lifestyle, where you just show fancy food, fancy clothes, and talk about fashion and travel, I think it's important for every person to realize what kind of access to knowledge that they have, which is very unique to them, which could actually differentiate their voice among many others speaking about it. So one edge would have to be in the expertise or the knowledge, which is why I also tell people, no matter how large you grow, it's best to not give up on your primary job and take up content creation full time, because the moment you give up on your primary job, you give up on a big moat on getting access to real world knowledge and expertise. So that is one. And of course, the second one could be either you differentiate on how you express a particular topic different than what anyone else possibly could, which speaks a lot about your communication and teaching skills, or you could have access to certain people who you could utilize for your content, or you could be in a country or in a geography where there isn't too much competition, and you could give people an insight to that market. But a combination of two edges or two differentiators really helps. And of course, knowing that it takes several years, a very, very long time to build something which can be monetized.
Very, very important point, Sarthak. So I'm going to talk about the first piece of advice, which is to stay in the job that you are at. And I think that's great advice, because you're keeping that paycheck coming, and there will be a period of time when you're not really getting money on an ongoing basis through the content that you're creating. But can it lead to complications? Would you have to move to a contract with your employer, have a conversation with them saying that you are going to be earning on the side?
I think most private organizations do not have a problem with their employees creating content, and they do realize that there could be certain other incomes that people could be earning, as long as the content that you're doing is not in contradiction with what you present, or you're not breaching confidentiality clauses, you're not breaching contracts of giving out information which your employer would not want you to give out, or you're working with competitors. I think those are areas or clauses of your employment agreement you should be absolutely certain to ensure you're not breaching. But I would always recommend that it's best to just declare to your HR that you also do create content, and which creates some opportunity for you to generate other income. And I think most organizations would ideally not have a problem, unless of course you work with agencies like the government. But we have enough examples of people who are working and earning money on the side. I think my advice would be more around, rather than not giving up a safety net of getting fixed cash flows in the form of salaries or predictable income. I think it's also a question of, a lot of content creators end up making a lot more money than they would from their main jobs. But I would say there you should optimize for, not for stability, but the fact that your job offers you a lot more in terms of skills. And you should also continue to compound on those skills, because not every life decision is a money decision. And
Sure.
a lot of times quick money also goes away just as fast.
Very, very good advice. On the topic of earning, though, before I get into the tax treatment of some of these things, because a lot of mistakes are made on that front. But before that, Sarthak, I think a lot of people have a choice that they have to make at some point about the blend between monetized content and content that was originally aimed for their audience. And how much do you monetize? Because invariably you will find that you might just be deviating from your original message if you have to monetize, because ultimately these are brand partnerships. So where do you find that balance? Did you have to, struggle a little bit to find that balance?
I think the best answer to that question would be, think of yourself as a media business who's competing with traditional media. And if news channels can continue to monetize and do advertisements along with giving news, and they can strike that balance, it's just about learning it over time and figuring out what is the balance. And as long as all disclaimers are going out and you're ensuring that you're adding value to your audience. And I think that can also be done with respect to picking the right brand partnerships where you are really aligned with respect to what is the message of another brand. Because a lot of times, even collaborations between companies which are not necessarily in media arise from the fact that they're all catering towards the same consumer, and think from a sustainability or consumer first perspective. So if there is an added incentive sometimes, but it aligns with your brand value, I see absolutely no problem in monetizing content or monetizing your distribution. Because at the end of the day, I mean, if I preach business and I like to talk about how people can make money, it would be hypocritical for me to say that, build a distribution, build an audience, but don't monetize it,
Yeah.
and do it only for the goodness of your heart and wanting to give. I think both those things can be very well combined into the same value system.
Okay, I got my answer. Now, speaking of the earning that you make, the government has rules about uh, what you receive in cash or in kind, right? So you can receive products from companies that you are allied with, and you can use that in your content, but then that constitutes a gift and that constitutes a certain value. There is a tax angle to it. How do you identify these streams and ensure that you're compliant?
It's actually tricky, and I'm glad you've asked this. So the government has come up with a rule where they say TDS has to be deducted on the value of the product which any brand decides to send to you. So if the value is, say, ends up being 10,000 rupees, there has to be a TDS deduction which the brand has to do, and they end up reporting it. So I think the bigger mismatch happens on the side of a lot of content creators, where the brand has actually ascribed value to the product that they have sent for usage and deposited TDS on it. And only at the time of tax filing do content creators realize, oh, this is income or value which is showing up in my statements like 26AS or the AIS statement, and I had not taken it into account in my accounting. I had not paid GST on it, because the GST laws again would say that you pay GST on the total consideration. Now, that consideration could be received in cash, could be received through a bank transfer, or could also be value of goods in kind. And I think that level of accounting is something that most content creators should be aware of. I think the problem happens where a lot of times brands would push creators to say, we want to make it look organic, which is why we don't want to disclose. And I think there it becomes a more ethical concern on what people are doing. But purely speaking, from the perspective of what is required, is disclosure of all value of products that you receive in bank, check, cash, kind, whichever format, pay your GST as well as income tax on it.
And perhaps get professional help as any other company would do, because ultimately you are going to be running a business eventually. That's the way that I would think about it. Sarthak, With regard to setting up an emergency fund, now you have advised that people should continue with their jobs, but then at the same time, would you say that these are things that require large investments at strategic points of time? And would you say that setting up a fund that can take you through a lean period is important to have?
I think as long as you're not giving up on your job, that's great.
You're
But I
okay.
would say, as an emergency fund, I mean, most people should try that, even if they have to take a bet on themselves at some point and say, what if I try picking up on this full time? I would say at least 12 months of savings is what you should have. The reason I say that is because, in my head, and based on my experience of creating content on the side, apart from, of course, my day job for the past 4.5 years, I've realized that the even if you do everything very well, the real success rate or the probability of something going viral is about 0.5%, which means for every 400 posts that you put out, imagine one every day, one might go viral. Or 200 posts that you put out every day, one might go viral. And if that is the case, I would say you need to put out content every day for at least 1 year to breach certain thresholds, where you can begin to monetize your content. And I think more people think about it, or the more people start thinking about it like a funnel, or from a mathematical perspective, would they realize that before I expect something in return, am I willing to offer value for at least 400 pieces of content for 400 days
Yeah.
to reach a point in somewhat monetize it?
Yeah, important. Absolutely. You don't start your first job thinking that you will earn 1 crore plus, right? You work towards it. I think it's the same philosophy. Rapid fire to end this conversation, which has already been insightful. But let me ask you this. One expense that you think content creators should claim as an expense, which they don't do enough?
I think all of them are claiming their travel and their fashion and whatnot as expenses, but I think it's important to claim expenses with respect to rentals. I think a lot of times content creators are actually using spaces as studio, and at times what does happen is that they could be taking assistance from their parents with respect to, okay, I'm using your space
Yeah.
to run a tiny office or to host my team and to do shoots. And I think it's important, if your parents are retired, you could very tangibly actually offer them a rent against those services, of course ensuring that your parents then pay GST on their commercial rent if it crosses certain thresholds.
Sure.
But I think it's a great opportunity for you to ensure that there is a certain amount of cash flow that goes towards your parents, while you're also paying them for them allowing you to access certain location and utilizing it for your content.
Last 3 questions, but rapid fire. Yeah. One expense that should not be claimed that is often claimed.
uh, I think a lot of them buy luxury watches and put it as an expense. I think that would be great.
A business account, a personal account for payments.
Business account for business payments, personal account for personal payments.
Good answer. The most common mistake, money mistake that creators make and regret later.
I think they assume that this career is going to go on lasting for a very long time. I think what they must realize is that longer personal brands last because of long-term value or expertise that they're able to deliver.
All right. Sarthak, absolute pleasure having you as always. Thanks so much for joining in.
Thank you.